Hello and welcome to the North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership podcast and vodcast. So this week we are going to be talking about the dark web, looking at what is it, why children may access it, and why is it a risk, and what should schools be doing about it, and other partners as well. So I am today joined by our LADOs. We've got Susan Crawford, our LADO manager. Welcome, Susan.
Welcome, thank you.
And we've also got Andy Kenyon, who's also one of our LADOs. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Hen.
Hi. So, first off, I'm going to ask you both a question now in terms of the internet. How many layers for the web can you name, and what do they do you think? Are you aware of any layers?
I'm aware of the open web and the dark web.
Okay, so 2 layers.
Yeah.
2 layers.
I think there's a third layer, but I can't remember what it's called. So I think there's as you said, the surface one where most things happen, the dark web where there's some more concerning things happen, and I think there's something else in the middle, but what it's called, I'm really sorry, I can't remember.
No worry at all. So there are basically 3 layers, and you were right in terms of there's like the open web and the dark web, but the one that you were referring to there, Susan, was also known as the deep web. So all of that makes up all of the internet traffic on the internet, and it's quite interesting to see where a lot of that traffic sort of gets distributed across. So when we talk about the open or the surface web, which is the other term it might be known as, this only accounts for about 4% of the content of the internet in public websites. So it's all of the normal sort of stuff that you would expect to see. So, you know, it's your online shopping of various different descriptions, whether it's your groceries, whether or not you're buying a book or whatever, you know, that you might be buying online. It's your search engines. So, you know, where you go to Google, Bing, or any other provider that you might use, all of that sort of stuff. And then it's the sort of like news feeds that you will get from various different things. So now whenever you open up your browser, if you're using Bing search, for example, that brings up lots of news things that you sort of set yourself to. The deep web is where most of the internet traffic exists. So when we're talking about the deep web, this is like 90% of online content which is private and is not accessible by search engines. So, for example, our emails are all part of the deep web because we do need that to be, you know, kept secure. We have our internet banking as well. So in terms of, you know, internet banking, we don't want those details being made available to anybody, and so, you know, that is part of the deep web, and there's layers of protection there. And also things like private messaging, so such as Facebook Messenger, you've got WhatsApp, Instagram, you know, your normal messages on your phone, all of that sort of thing all goes on the deep web.
What percentage is that then? You said there was a small percentage on the surface web, so what sort of percentage is in the deep web?
The deep web is 90% of all internet traffic. So it's like
right.
Really heavy
part
of the internet is where most of the work goes. And then the last area is the dark web, and this accounts for about 6%. So it's actually more than the surface web. And this is where there's a lot of content that is encrypted and not indexed by search engines like Google and Bing. And there are a variety of services and sites that are available on the dark web that people can access. There are online stores where you can buy all sorts of things, and you know, there are help groups, and there are ways of sharing news and stuff like that. So let's have a look at what some of this means in terms of truths or myths. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to tell me whether or not you think it's a truth or a myth. So the dark web is illegal.
I've always thought it was, because that's where you can go to buy drugs, where you can access, other illegal things. So I've always understood or thought that actually accessing it was illegal to do so. But I think that might not be correct, might it, Hayden?
I don't think it is illegal, but you can do illegal things on it.
Yeah. Basically, in this country, it's not illegal. In most countries, accessing the dark web is not illegal. In a matter of fact, in the UK, most parts of Europe, and in the US, it's completely legal to access. It tends to be countries with more restrictive regimes that would have it make it illegal to access the dark web. But obviously, the right to communicate in whatever ways, one of the many privileges that we enjoy. All online crime takes place on the dark web.
I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure there's other online crime taking place. I was thinking on the deep web, where you've got internet fraud and those kind of things, people hacking into accounts. So presumably that's illegal activities that could take place in other places. So it wouldn't all be on the dark web. I don't know. What do you think, Andy?
Well, I'd have thought most of it, but I'm sure there's people who aren't that clever who just will do it thinking they're sort of anonymous on the open web.
Okay. And you'd be right thinking it's a myth, because the dark web is not an inherently bad place. The dark web more has a bad image through media and the reports on the news, because it's always the dark web, is this evil place. It's not inherently evil. It just happens because of the fact there's a lot of anonymity that relates to the dark web, because that's part of the purpose of it. It means it's easier for crimes to take place, but crimes do take place outside of the dark web. You will have people who are intentionally trying to gain access to children to harm them will be using Facebook. You will have people trying to access your bank account, that will be on the deep web, or people trying to access your emails, or people pretending to be other people, trying to trick people out of money or whatever. These all take place in various different layers of the web. It's not just on the dark web. Cyber criminals are more likely actually to operate on the surface web so that they can target more people, because not everybody accesses a dark web, which sort of comes on to my next question is, you can't access the dark web in a normal browser. Is that true or false?
I think that's not true.
Well, I was going to say I thought it was true, because I thought, oh dear, we're not very bright here, are we? I thought you were saying you couldn't go in on Google or Bing or those kind of things onto the dark web, and therefore I thought there was I thought that was the browser, and so I thought there was a different way of going in, but I might be misunderstanding again.
Right, it's actually true. You can't access the dark web through a normal browser, because you'll need specialist software to access the dark web. That's very easy to get and very easy to download, put on your machine and access. But it doesn't mean that you can just go onto Google and say, I want to access the dark web, hit enter, and then it'll take you to the dark web. That's not how it works. It's a different structure for the dark web, and obviously quite unstructured in comparison to the surface web, because there isn't all of the listed websites and stuff like that in the same way. So do we think the dark web is only there for tech savvy people and criminals?
I would say no. I think the presumption is that it is, but I think other people can use it to either research or probably sounds a bit strange, but go deeper into their inquiries than what's available on the open web.
I think there needs to be, for me, a little bit of more understanding, because if you notice if you're going onto Google and putting in now Amazon or Tesco, are you're having to find a mechanism that I know you'll explain to us in terms of how you get onto the dark web. So it needs a little bit more than the basic to do that. But I don't think it doesn't feel to be hugely tech savvy. It just feels that you need to know the route into it. And once you've got that, or somebody's told you, or you found it from wherever, that actually once you're in, the only thing I think that you were saying, Hayden, that's perhaps relevant there is that the search engine doesn't work in the same way. So you've got to know what you're looking for in a sense, but that's not particularly tech savvy. I'm sure that's fairly easily accessible information for folk that want to go in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's a myth that it's for tech savvy people. If you have the ability to surf to go to a normal website to look up information that you're after, download a file and run it, you can access the dark web. It's as simple as that. Whether or not you'll be able to find what you want on the dark web is another thing, where you would have to do more investigative work in terms of like going to different groups or being told about a specific .onion page that you would go to, because on a normal web browser you would go to a HTML page, whereas the dark web normally operates around the .onion, because the dark web is layered like an onion. That is the actual analogy that is made with it.
Yeah, it probably then, rather than being tech savvy, it requires a bit more time and effort, doesn't it? And I'm guessing that for some children who are interested in technical things, actually that research and that digging around will be quite interesting for them. So children that like to spend time on computers and like to investigate those kind of things, knowing that they've got to do a bit more work and a bit more time and got to delve into it deeper, will probably be something that's quite an attractive option for them. I think for a lot of children, young people, they'll lose interest quite quickly. Because it's a bit more hard work. But for those children that have that kind of technical mind and are interested in those things, I can see it drawing them in.
Yes, yeah, and I'm sure it'll be quite addictive as well, especially start finding a lot of things that they wouldn't have access to.
But just to be clear, you can't accidentally stumble upon it.
No,
you've got to
follow. The internet has evolved a lot over the years. When you go back to the 90s, where you could, put something in and you would, half of the hits that would turn up at the beginning of a hit would be access to porn sites. Since then, things have moved on. The way that search engines operate are very different, but also it's a completely different layered off section. You need that specific software to be able to access the dark web. So more protection in terms of users to be able to make sure they're not going into areas they don't want to. And a lot of it, things like Google and Bing will also do safe search as well, but you're never going to go from Google into the dark web.
So if a parent puts parental controls on, would the child be able to access the dark web?
Depends entirely on the parental controls.
Right. Okay.
Because one of the things you can do as a parent is to not allow unauthorized software to be run, if you've got the right software to do that. So that would mean that as long as you haven't installed the appropriate browser yourself, you're not going to be able to, or your child's not going to be able to install anything. But where there's a will, there is a way. There are ways to circumvent things. You can block things off with your internet service provider if they offer that sort of level of protection to firewall off. So you can go to your internet service provider and say, I don't want to be able to access like pornography or hate speech or whatever. They will block it at their end, but it's always a reactive service, so it's never 100%. And also because of the way that some of the other software, which we'll come on to later on, about how people access the internet, they normally do it with a virtual private network or a VPN. You might have heard of companies like NordVPN and stuff like that advertised. Well, basically what that does is it circumvents some of the firewall protections that your internet service provider would do, because it masks your location and your identity and bounces it around the world. So there is a difficulty in terms of it's nothing's 100% in this world, but you can only do the best that you can in terms of what you know. But one of the best ways is to stop people being able to install software on the computer that they shouldn't have access, although you don't want them to access.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, Hayden, because I think there's two aspects there. There's the aspect of making sure parents are aware of the dark web, and that they have an opportunity with any devices their children at home might be able to get access to prevent them getting access to the best of their ability. And then again, it's part of the school side, isn't it? It's how schools set up their network devices, etc., to try and ensure that that they're monitoring and or preventing where possible. So that's really helpful to know. Thanks, Hayden.
Yeah, and obviously there are responsibilities in terms of governing bodies to ensure that they've got those arrangements in place in terms of the schools. These requirements are set out in keeping children safe in education. So it's a very important sort of area that governors need to be aware of, and also things like picking up issues where maybe somebody's tried to access the dark web within your network. What are you doing about that? Is that just being stopped and no one's doing anything, or is it being stopped and it's being reported to somebody, and do they know what to do with that information from there? What is the response if, for example, somebody's tried to go to a dark website that would have child pornography on it? Would you as would you be assured as a governor that your staff know if there is something like that would then get flagged appropriately, so that you can identify, is it a child who's done it, is it a member of staff who's done it, or do you have a guest network and you've allowed somebody to go on and they've done it? Can you track that person? So there are a lot of different things in terms of how it's set up, but there are lots of technical concerns. But obviously schools use things like Smoothwall or other providers, and these things are quite well set up. A lot of things are known, but it's those procedures that link to it that might be a concern.
Yeah, just following up from that, Hayden, I was thinking it's, children accessing, staff accessing. It's also, governors, if governors are in. It might be, cleaning, caretaking staff working out of hours. You might have contractors in over the school holidays, all of whom might be able to get access, to the dark web through, computer use in school and or as a guest. So it does feel important that however it's set up to try and prevent people accessing it, that where access is attempted, that we know when and where, so we can try and track who, because there's some questions that need to be asked, aren't there?
Yeah, definitely. And there's also another issue in relation to, if you do allow guest networks, is that guest network protected? Because somebody could just park in the street and access your network if it's not protected. So there are a lot of security concerns too, but obviously that's why you have the support from either, if it's an academy, your IT support, or if you maintain school, for example, the school's IT services from the local authority. So, and they're very experienced in all of these sort of areas to be able to address some of those issues and make sure the appropriate safeguards are in place. But it's that testing of them as well, so that you can be assured as a governor.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So what about you being completely anonymous on the dark web?
I don't think that you can be completely anonymous. I think you can try and hide yourself, but there must be a way at certain times of being tracks are identified.
Yeah, again, I think I'd always understood that you don't have an IP address in a similar way that if you're on the web somewhere else, it can come back to an IP address, and that part of the whole lot of the part of the dark web is to be able to, I think you said, around bounce the identity around wherever, so that people can't track you back to where you've come from. But I'm not sure, as Andy said, that it's 100% perfect.
Yeah, it's not. Basically, it is a myth that dark web browsers keep you anonymous by hiding your IP address and encrypting your traffic. They do that. However, if you log into your email, your social media, you can immediately be tracked from that moment because you've opened up that door. So it depends upon what you do and how you do it, but things like virtual private networks will help protect your identity. Using the dark web browsers will help protect your identity, but they are not perfect. Some dark web browsers have vulnerabilities which can be exploited to reveal who you are as well. And if you get spyware downloaded onto your machine, people can access that as well to gain access to to your details. So you've always really got to be careful, but this is where it's sort of like that defense in depth in terms of the security that you can have. Make sure you've got the proper virus checkers on, make sure that it's scanning for any sort of malicious code, which might not necessarily be a virus, but it might also be tracking and stuff like that, because it happens on the surface web all of the time. How many times do you go and you look up let's say you look up a model of a vacuum cleaner, and then when you go to an online store, not naming any names, but the first thing that you're getting offered is offers on vacuum cleaners. That's because you've had tracking cookies that have been following you in terms of your activities, and then are targeting that information to you. That any web part will do that as well.
Yeah. I think what's interesting that comes to me from what you just said, Hayden, is if people think that they can go on the dark web and they can't be found, then it's not a deterrent. But if you're saying to them, if you go on the dark web, it isn't anonymous, entirely anonymous, and you can be found, it might prevent some people going on there thinking the opposite. It's a bit of a deterrent, isn't it? People go onto the dark web possibly thinking, I can do what I like on here, and you can't find out who's doing it and what's happening. If that's not the case, it's part of information that needs to go out to children, young people using your network in whatever way that ensures that they know that things can be tracked. And that might stop somebody thinking, well, I can do it because you're not going to get me, whereas that's not the case.
And absolutely, and we'll come on to it shortly, but in some regimes in the world where the dark web is illegal, people literally rely for that for their own safety, where they've accessed the dark web because they're trying to let other countries know what's happening or report on things and that sort of stuff.
So can I ask a question? So
sure.
Does anyone police the dark web?
The internet is largely an unpoliced sort of area. It relies on corporations doing it. It relies on organisations like CEOP and the various international equivalents of those organisations all doing this. But the thing with a website is that for example, you can go on the dark web, you can buy drugs or whatever. If it gets found, then they just change the link to it, and then it gets known again, and then it gets shut down, and it's just this constant ping pong match. And it's unregulated in the fact that you don't need to have a particular building or location to run a website from, because if you connect to the internet, you can set up your own server at home. Granted, it would be technically unachievable for most people, but you can still do it. And you can look up online and watch a YouTube video on how to do it. So, it'll even teach you how to do it by following that sort of instruction.
Yeah. It's similar. You were saying there that most of the surface web is unregulated. The dark web is probably equally so, or more so, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say that for me, I always kind of like think of the dark web being a bit like the Wild West.
That's a good analogy. Yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. What says goes until somebody finds out, and then you go and do it somewhere else.
Yeah, it's like in the times of Christopher Columbus, it's the map that's got the dragons on and stuff like that that's going on. It's like,
but I mean,
what's there.
Yeah, what's interesting is though that's what makes it very attractive to children and young people, isn't it? It's that sense of something that they perhaps shouldn't be doing, or it's got some things on it that people might not want them to look at, and that's what makes it, very attractive. I mean, even its name, dark, signifies something that will be a draw for some children, won't it? And that's what we've got to be really mindful of.
Yeah, sinister web. That's what it gives that feeling of, something a bit naughty, and young people are on about taking risks. I remember when I was a kid, granted it was a lot of years ago now, but I wouldn't necessarily listen to what my parents said or what my teachers said. I would make my own mind up, and if I thought, that the gain is better than the risk, you would go for it, and maybe regret it later on. That's part of growing up. But
I presume, sorry, just another one following up from that one, Hayden. I presume in some areas of the gaming world, do people start off on the surface web gaming and then get invited into the dark web, or does that not happen through gaming processes?
I think the thing is with gaming, that people might get involved in the dark web through many one of the things, but I think that would be more like a sort of like tailored sort of approach to try and gain access to a person rather than anything else. Because when we're talking about gaming nowadays is a multi-million-pound industry, and esports, as they're otherwise known, are a very popular area, especially for young people, where they can literally earn millions of pounds if they win a competition. It's like the whole image that I think a lot of people still hang on to is that the people who are on the internet playing video games are like, you spotted teenager in the mum's bedroom, or it's some sort of man child who lives in the mother's basement. That's the sort of images that you kind of get from anybody who might be using the internet in a gaming or a nerdy way. And it's not like that anymore. There are people from all walks of life who do all sorts of things. Online gaming is a massive industry now. They get, you get teams who have sponsorships from major corporations. They get lots of money. You can buy branded T-shirts and equipment, just like you would with a football team.
Yeah. So not particularly something that's associated with the dark web at all. No, I was just curious in terms of people gaming. I know on the gaming side, sometimes what happens is, a young person gaming is then asked to come into a private gaming and ends up in a more dangerous place. And I wondered whether that might be a draw into the dark web, but it doesn't seem to be from what you're saying.
Yeah, because that would be more what they tend to do is draw people into an area that is more less monitored. So, for example, if you're talking about a child who's on Xbox Live, who is playing a video game and meets somebody who, subsequently take that person, to start to groom them, what they will do is ask them to go onto another service, such as maybe Discord, where it's sort of like a personalized chat room, and there won't be anybody moderating that conversation, and I would say probably somewhere like Discord, which is very much sort of like associated with gaming chat, generally speaking, and is used for that legitimately all of the time. I'm not saying it's an inherently bad place at all. Then everybody uses it. You know, I know people who use it. I've used it myself, just as a form of communication. But people are more likely to be pulled into those sort of areas.
Yes, and that's on the surface. That's the surface web and not the dark web, isn't it?
That'd be more the deep web, because it'd be that communications layer that would be encrypted.
No, that's helpful. It was just I was thinking whether there was any connection between, you know, the concerns that we have with some children gaming and getting drawn into other things, but it doesn't appear that's a particular feature for the dark web side.
I think that if anything, you might be more likely to get people being drawn into areas of the dark web where it's more maybe relating to racial hatred or you know, terrorism or that sort of thing, where the anonymity is, you know, a lot more secure than the deep.
No, it's helpful, thank you. That was just I know we went off on a sidetrack.
Can I ask a question? And how do parents police it with their children?
Well, there is parental software. We're going to come on to all of that, though.
All right.
In terms of that as an approach, you know, later on. But just let me ask you a couple of questions, because we've already talked about gaming as a possible area. But why else do you think a child might access the dark web? You know, for whatever reason, you know, what other reasons do you think that they might go for? I mean, we've already said about the risk taking as well, because children like to just, you know, experiment, and there's no matter with that unless they put themselves in danger. But why else might they, or anybody else, go on the dark web?
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure, yeah.
I was thinking just curiosity. It's you know, it's one of those things that is talked about, and we don't often. I don't know how much information schools give to children in terms of what's on there, but if they don't really know, they know there's something out there. For some children, it's simply curiosity, isn't it? I know about this place that people tell me I shouldn't go, and I don't know what's there, so I'll go and have a look. So there's an element of just experimentation and curiosity, isn't there? Not necessarily looking to find something bad. It's just looking to see what's there because they don't know what's there.
Yeah, entirely. You know, I think that is another area. Anything else that you can think of?
To do something illegal.
Yeah. You know, nefarious activities. That's always a popular one.
I mean, there's elements there you talked about at the beginning, Hayden, about research, isn't there? That there are some things on there that are, you know, journalists use, etc. So it may be for some youngsters actually getting access to some uncensored materials that are only available through there that aren't harmful in any way. Actually, might be not a bad thing. Yeah.
And in a matter of fact, there are a lot of reasons why people might do this. So, for example, journalism is a very popular one because the dark web can be used by journalists who report about their country because of oppressive regimes, as it allows them to remain safe and anonymous while they're covering the news, so that you can actually you can find out what's happening rather than the propaganda that's put on the TV. You can, you know, find out what is happening in that country. Whistleblowers is another area. So, you know, most organisations will have whistleblowing policies, certainly in terms of anybody working with children, and we do, as a partnership, the NYSCP has practice guidance on the website in relation to whistleblowers as well. But whistleblowers and other news sources can use the dark web to communicate with journalists and each other safely as well. And it's a common way to do so is through secure drop sites like the BBC have a place on the web that people can securely drop that information. But it doesn't necessarily mean, in terms of journalism, there's also news sites and blogs that have lots of highly rated dark web news centres in there as well. So it's not only the journalists submitting that information, but it's also the reporting of it as well. People will also use it as well because of freedom of speech. You know, it's a human right to have that sort of freedom of speech, albeit qualified depending on where you are. and it may be used by groups or individuals to express their views to wider audiences. This may be, everything from a legitimate concern to extremists, behaviour and activists. And in a matter of fact, during the Arab Spring, the dark web was used to harness the platform's power to organise demonstrations and disseminate information during that. So, there is that. Some people just want to protect their own identity, and have a legitimate reason for hiding their identity, such as if they're a whistleblower or they're a protester or a journalist, any of those ones mentioned above, or maybe they're in witness protection. Who knows? There could be a lot of different reasons why people might need that anonymity. And then also illegal activity, exactly as you said, Andy. The dark web can be used for buying drugs, weapons, child pornography, or various different other sort of things. You can download illegal software from there. There are social sites on the web on there, and games, cryptocurrency related services might be on there as well. A bit more, not the normal ones, but some of the ones that you maybe wouldn't want to do legally. Hacking groups and that sort of thing can communicate quite freely under there as well, because it's so hard to be able to track who anybody is on that system. So there's a lot of reasons why people will access the dark web. It's not just necessarily that just because they want to do something bad. There are legitimate reasons as well, and there are like self-help groups for people who want to self-harm or take their own life. You can go on the dark web, and there are groups like that, and different other groups in those sort of areas as well. So there's a lot of legitimate reasons as well as a lot of illegal reasons. So how do you access the dark web? Can you name any software that you would need to access it?
You mentioned Onion, and I don't know if that's one. Is it Tor, or am I misremembering?
No, yeah, Tor, yeah.
That's my limit.
Yeah,
that was the one I was going to. That's the one I was going to say.
Yeah,
no, I wouldn't.
Like I said before, you can't stumble on the dark web by accident. There are, unlike the open web and the deep web, these services require a specialist, not search engine, but browser. And it's impossible to access the dark web using like your Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Opal, Edge, all of those sort of browsers. You're not going to be able to access those. And you would need to have access to a specialist browser such as, and should use a virtual private network, because otherwise your home IP address will be exposed as well. VPNs tend to, the appeal of VPNs is that they mask that from your internet service provider and don't keep logs after a certain amount of time. So that means it then becomes very difficult for the police to investigate any criminal investigations.
As a parent, if your child had, or I don't know, a family member had been on the dark web, used a VPN, if you then switched on the same laptop, could you see anything that notified you?
No. Other than the fact that there was a VPN on the machine,
but what would you see there? Is that like an app sign on your?
Yeah, it'd be an app. So it'd be like NordVPN or Norton VPN, whatever it is that you've installed. You'd be able to, or they'd installed. You'd be able to see that piece of software, that application. But doesn't mean that you would be. That wouldn't mean that they'd necessarily access the dark web, because people also use VPNs to be able to change their location to a different country so that they can watch a film on Netflix that's not available in one country but is in another.
Right.
There are legitimate, I think not Netflix might.
That's not in Netflix might argue it's not legitimate, but
you go on holiday and you go to America and you can,
But if you, I suppose from that, that what you're saying is, if you did see VPN, it would give you grounds to maybe speak to your child or whoever uses a computer as to what's that doing on.
Yeah, and for me, I think that in order to be able to properly police this with your children, I think that you always need to have that open conversation, and not necessarily being judgmental with your children and not coming at it from a heavy-handed approach, but trying to be like supportive, try to understand what they're doing, and have that conversation and to keep the channels open, because if you don't have that, then you're not going to get anywhere at all. But being a supportive parent is definitely probably the better way to approach this.
Yeah, and the same within school settings, isn't it? It's whatever schools are teaching and talking to children about this area. It's giving children an opportunity to ask questions about it, to give them some information about it, what's good about it, what's not good about it, so that the children and young people can learn to operate it in an appropriate and mature way where it's appropriate to do so.
Absolutely. And I've got some questions in a file that I'll show you that you can use as a parent or as a professional to be able to do some of that diggy deep. And because don't forget, if the child's accessed the dark web, they haven't necessarily done anything wrong. That's the important thing. It's about doing that bit more digging and finding out what is
and it's asking the open questions to understand why they've done it, what the motivation was, where they've been, have they found and seen something that's potentially upset them, and understanding what they're looking for and why, and then you're able to support them in a much more appropriate way, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are different types of software that you might want to notice if people are using the dark web. We've already mentioned Tor. Whonix is another bit people use. This as it eliminates any possible DNS leaks, as it's otherwise called, making your privacy a key factor. Tails secures your connection and does not require any hard disk space to function at all, because it's like run from a USB stick. And then Subgraph OS is more of a complete operating system that bases itself around that secure access to the dark web. One of the most important things that you can tell is about the naming structures, and websites on the open or surface web always end with a .com, .co.uk, .net, .org, .org.uk. All of those sort of things are standard ones that we see, whereas dark web will end with .onion. So that's a good way of finding out. It tends to be that things like Tor don't maintain a history of what people have searched for, so you don't have that history to look back to, because that is the whole point of it being an anonymous search. And the most common browsers, as I said, are those sort of like 4 areas that you would probably look at, and you can get those on phones as well and tablets. So don't think this is just a laptop or a PC issue. You can get Tor on your phone, and that's iPhone or Android. So is your child always on there as well? Or a child that you're working with, can they access that on there? And let's talk to them about it. So in terms of why a child or a young person might access the dark web, why do we think that? Have you got any experience of children, young people accessing it?
I think, as you said before, there's an element of curiosity. There's an element of, I know it's there, and it's perhaps perhaps I shouldn't, but I'm going to go and do it anyway. So I think and there will be certain children that will be drawn to that more obviously than other children. Some children are more interested in computers, more interested in doing those kind of things. So, there'll be a group of children that people work with that will just are attracted to those areas, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like anything else. If people have an interest in something, they will do more in that area.
Mm.
So we've already said things like curiosity about the technology would be a very big one. I would suggest that will come across. Bragging rights, bragging to the mates, I've been on the dark web and I can access it, and this sort of thing. I think that would be a big thing. Maybe children are concerned about the privacy. That could be a legitimate reason, especially if they're suffering abuse or whatever and maybe looking for help on the internet. They might approach the dark web as a way of approaching that.
Mm.
Obviously, accessing illegal content and illegal services will be one of the things why they might go on there as well. Or that whole thing about being coerced or forced to access the dark web. Maybe they're being forced by another child who doesn't know how to do it, but knows that, a more technologically advanced child, it gets them to do the stuff for them, being bullied or forced to do it. So there's a lot of reasons why, and this is only a very small sample of what the reasons why might be. So what are the risks? Obviously, the biggest risk is probably divulging personal information, which can then be used to locate the child and cause further issues in relation to the safety of that child, putting that child at risk. Another big one is obviously going to be exposure to harmful content and illegal content. We know that children and young people access illegal content, such or content we don't want them to, such as pornography, and there can be much more hardcore banned pornography on the dark web, and it just gives it harms that personal development because it distorts that sense of what reality is in terms of relationships and that sort of thing. Exploitation is another really key area as well. Children could be exploited through their access online, and that could be just even straight down to blackmail of, we know what you looked at online, and we've got pictures from your webcam to show you watching these things and doing certain things and that sort of stuff. So there are a lot of concerns there. Extremism and radicalization, obviously, it's a very big big concern. Is there the whole buying illegal goods and services puts the young person at risk anyway? Are they buying knives online, or even more lethal weapons, or are they buying drugs? And what are they doing with those drugs? Are they using them themselves? Are they selling them to other children? That sort of thing. And also people seeking to harm them as well, by engaging in online communications with people. They might end up being exploited or radicalized or abused in some sort of way. So those are all of the sort of risks. And to be honest, when you look at those risks, they're exactly the same risks as they are on the normal surface web and on the deep web. It hasn't really changed anything. It's just, how they get to those risks is less. And I would say that probably some of those will be less likely on the dark web than there would be on, or at least initially, than on the surface web. Not all people, young people, will want to access the dark web. That's one thing that we can be assured of. And some young people may find that the dark web to be much less interesting once they have access to it, because it's not as intuitive as using a Google search in the same way. So don't panic about that sort of stuff, and only talk to a young person about the dark web if you know that they've access to it or are interested in accessing it. I would say is probably an important thing to bear in mind. What should you do? I would say that there are three areas that you've got to focus on in terms of what you want to do, and that's remaining calm, asking questions, and seeking the support. So when we remain calm, we don't want to make assumptions, and don't tell a young person that you're worried or angry about what they've done. You've got to remain non-judgmental because you don't know why they've accessed it. Don't blame them for anything. You know, we're not talking about victim blaming or anything like that. Just don't blame them for anything that what may have happened while they've been on the dark web, and remind them that you want to make sure that they're safe and supported, and that you're coming at it from a point of concern and, you know, support rather than any other sort of direction. You know, ask sensitive, open-ended questions to them. You know, if you don't know much about the dark web, don't be afraid to ask them to explain things to you so that you can better understand, and seek to understand more about it as well. And you might want them to feel that they can, you know, share the thoughts and feelings in relation to the dark web as well. In terms of conversation starters, you could start it off with, you know, well, why did you want to go on the dark web? You know, or has there been a time when you were on the dark web that, you know, you felt uncomfortable or unsure about something? Or tell me what you saw when you were on the dark web, or how did you access it? You know, how did you access the dark web? Or do you think that you will go on the dark web again? It's probably quite an important question, because a lot of children will honestly say no and actually, you know, absolutely mean it, because it might not be as exciting once that you know, they think it's there. You know, the way the media sort of like builds it up, it's like this James Bondy sort of, you know, counter-espionage sort of world, and it's just a web browser. At the end of the day, it's what people access and how they know to navigate it, which is the issue. If you seek support, if you think someone, a young person is going on the dark web and may be at great risk of immediate harm, then obviously call 999. However, you know, if they're not going to be at immediate risk, you don't need to call that. You can call the NSPCC helpline, which is 0808 800 5000. Or you can follow the NYSCP multi-agency safeguarding procedures to make a referral to the local authority. Or you can contact the Children and Family Service on 0300 131 2131, and that way, you know, you can talk to somebody who will be able to help you further from there, and you can gain that support from them. Keeping younger people safe for online, you know, what we've got to think about is support for families to understand the dark web as well, and make sure that you're using appropriate filtering and monitoring solutions. The good link from the Southwest Grid for Learning, which is on screen there, that you'll find out more about filtering and monitoring. You can encourage and support young people to identify a healthy use of technology as well. So, you know, it's like having agreements in place, especially if you're a parent. You know, you can have agreements about the type of things that your child can and can't do, and you can discuss that. You know, you can put in filtering systems through different software that you can access either by going to a place like PC World or downloading it online. You can let young people know that there is support available to them, and that information for parents about online safety is also available from the NYSCP website, which is safeguardingchildren.co.uk/help, guidance and support. So you'll be able to find out more information there. We have a lot of stuff on our website in relation to how to set up security controls on various different systems from your games console, because there are a lot of those things that are built in on like Xboxes, PlayStations, Nintendos, and then, you know, your iPads as well, and the safeguarding software that's on there, on your PC, and what you can do with that, even right down to, you know, things like your Amazon devices as well. So, you know, we have links to lots of different resources for parents or professionals to look at in relation to that. There's also further support that you can get by if you have a concern about an online sexual abuse or exploitation, then you can report that to the COP Safety Centre, which is cop.police.uk/safety-centre. Links on the screen. There you can report about any sort of online safety, your sexual abuse issue. One of the things that's very popular with young people as well nowadays is the sharing of nude images online. It is one of the ways that young people communicate, but obviously we don't want that information on there. And the Childline and Internet Watch Foundation's Report Remove tool is available, and what that will do is it will take down any versions of that image, but also hashtag it so that people can't upload that image subsequently as well. Or you can also call or message Childline if you're worried and want to talk to somebody about it. So child9.org.uk/get-support. That's another great resource for you to be able to use. In terms of organisations protecting against the dark web, obviously have an online safety programme within your organisation and teach children how to stay safe online, and adapt this for vulnerable children or victims of abuse and pupils with special educational needs. Very important as well, because you know the approach might vary. All staff should undergo safeguarding and child protection training, which would include online safety. And online safety is running an inherent theme in everything that you do as well. And also ensure that you have the appropriate safeguards in place and related policies and procedures. So all of that's very important organisationally. Your organisation should have filtering and monitoring systems in place to protect children and young people when they access the internet. And your organisation should be doing all that they can to reasonably protect children from harmful content. So that's stuff like pornography, fake news, or racist or extremist views. Contact with adults posing as children, or engagement with commercial advertising. The conduct such as the making and sending of messages or the receiving of explicit images, or online bullying, because obviously, you know, when I grew up, if I was being bullied, once I got home I was safe, but children are exposed to it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Commerce as well, stopping children from being able to do online gambling. Phishing scams as well, that's another one, or inappropriate advertising. Like I said before, consider your organisations filtering and monitoring to make sure that they're appropriate for the age range who you allow to access your network and the internet through your network. The number of children and young people that you're going to work with, how often they're going to access the internet through your infrastructure, and how children and young people will be connected to the IT infrastructure and internet. You've also got to do a bit of cost versus risk. You can lock things down to make it very prohibitive, but you've got to make sure it's going to be work and it's going to address the risk to a sufficient level. We're not talking about eradicating, we're talking about managing risk. And remember that the risks of media such as USB bootable drive, because that can circumvent a lot of the controls you put on a PC and give it its own operating environment. So lock down the ability to boot from a USB drive, and also disable USB drives as well as a good way forward. But that does obviously mean some restrictive practice in terms of being able to download things as a business if you want to onto a stick. And for specified authorities, remember that the prevent duty also requires your organisation to keep children safe online and have things such as appropriate online filtering of web page content anyway. So that's another issue for you to consider. For schools, following school procedures is always important, and where there's an immediate significant concern, again, 999. Remember, working together tells us everybody has a responsibility for safeguarding children. And the responsibility to refer a child when it's believed believed or suspected that a child has suffered significant harm and or is likely to suffer significant harm and or has developed mental and welfare needs which are likely only to be met through the provision of services with agreement of the parents. If you believe that the situation is urgent but does not require the police, you can phone the Customer Referral Centre, which is on 0300 131 2131 to make telephone contact. Outside of business hours, it's still the same number, 0300 131 2131, to speak to the emergency duties team. You will be required to make a written referral within 24 hours of your telephone call. But don't forget, you can also visit the Worried About a Child page on our website, which gives all of this information anywhere. Just go on to safeguardingchildren.co.uk and it's a button at the top right hand corner of the screen. For more information, you can also go to our Twitter line as well. We post information on there on a regular basis, and our Facebook group. We have our YouTube channel and Instagram, and we also have our podcast, which you may be listening to this now as well on our YouTube. And also for anybody, you can also sign up to our e-bulletin to subscribe to that. And on the first working day of every month, you'll receive the latest update on safeguarding information. Okay, so is there any questions from any of that? Do you have anything else that you want to ask in relation to the dark web?
Nothing I want to ask. I think it's just been really helpful because it's an area that's I think people don't know much about and are fearful about. And what you've explained is there's a lot on there that isn't to be feared, but we need to understand and help our children, young people understand what's on there so they can keep themselves safe and they know that there's areas they shouldn't go on to. But I think the other thing that's really important is educating parents about keeping their children safe, asking the right questions, and also making sure, in our schools and colleges, including our primary schools, that we've got systems and processes in place to try and prevent access, and if there has access been made, how we can find out what's been happening and who's been doing it. So, that's just been really helpful. Thank you, Hayden.
And I think you're entirely right. And one issue that I think you said is really important is that whole parental issue, because I do think that we as professionals need to be able to support parents to understand some of the risks, because the natural reaction for a lot of parents would be the snap decision: I'm taking your phone off you, I'm taking the internet off you. But what the parents doing at that instance is socially isolating a child, and they will look for ways to satisfy that need to be able to access what they need online, and will do it more surreptitiously. A better approach would be to, if you're working with a family where maybe online issues are a concern, is to help to inform, educate and upskill parents to understand the risks and to understand a more balanced approach for having them to address the issue with their children, so that it's more less judgmental and more supportive in terms of helping understand what the risks are and how they can address them. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I'd just like to thank Susan and Andy for joining me today. And of course, don't forget, we'll be doing more of these. So please, if you've downloaded the podcast, we hope you've enjoyed it. If you've watched the Vodcast version of this, likewise. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and we will be back with future episodes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hayden.
Bye now.